First of all, for people who say that Gerard Butler is a bad singer or that he isn't great as the Fantôme, I don't know what to tell you. Maybe you're more familiar with one of the also excellent stage performers. I get it, I'm a snob too. Not necessarily a musical theater snob, but I get being particular about something. But I just don't know how you watch Butler's performance in Phantom of the Opera and aren't completely entranced. The guy's magnetic, he commands every moment he's on screen. I'm gay now, Gerard Butler made me gay. Butler conveys this sort of silky machismo that you don't see too often, probably because it's so hard to pull off. He's got that steely-eyed gaze, there's that slight snarl of his upper lip under his mask. Those are the sort of things you just don't get at the theater. As far as his singing goes, his voice is full, it's masculine, it's varied. His personality comes through in the slight Scottish lisp of some of his words. I think that's the most important thing is, if you are going to take a turn as the Phantom, you can't necessarily outsing these other guys who've already done it so well, but you can at least put your little spin on it. Your personality can shine through, and I think Butler's does. Reading and listening to other reviews of the film, I was surprised to find that it had such a controversial reputation. One video that was referenced a number of times was one by Lindsay Ellis, and after watching it, I just don't think it was very good. It's an old video, but it's still brought up today as the gold standard of criticism regarding this film, and so I figured why not go through it and point out why I think it's not very good. Because I think the film deserves better. Okay, so the video starts off with a brief history of the movie musical and how it's changed over time before going into an examination of the difference between diegetic and non-diegetic filmmaking. Now, you usually hear this come up as it pertains to music. Non-diegetic music is sort of the soundtrack, music that exists outside of the world within the film, whereas diegetic is music sort of within the film that the characters are able to hear. Say, for instance, when a character turns on the radio. The video points out that most movie musicals, we would consider them non-diegetic. When a character breaks into song, you are sort of transported to a different level of narrative reality. You're in a more sort of interpretive realm of emotion. You sort of entered the characters' emotional lives. And as I'm listening to this, I'm wondering, well, why make the distinction at all? Why does it have to be one or the other? And she kind of gets to this point eventually.
Now, you may be thinking, in a world where more realistic style of filmmaking is in and the dopey Hello Dolly style is out, are you implying that all musicals need to either be like Cabaret or Chicago, as close to realistic as possible and a clear line delineating what is fantasy? Let's talk about Moulin Rouge.
But this is sort of my main contention, is she gets to this point, but then sort of dances around it, or doesn't really address it satisfactorily. If you look at some martial arts films, for instance, specifically ones that have a lot of wire work, if you watch the movie Hero or House of Flying Daggers, where they're flying back and forth and they're defying gravity, that sort of operates on the same principle. Is this diegetic or is this non-diegetic? Are they actually in the world, flying with superpowers, defying gravity, or is this sort of a heightened emotional realm to sort of communicate certain feelings? Is that why they're sort of flying back and forth? I don't think you're supposed to necessarily draw that distinction one way or the other. Again, the video sort of touches on this idea, but for some reason doesn't see it as applicable to Phantom of the Opera. We'll come back to that in a minute, because before actually, answering the question of whether we should even draw any distinction between diegetic or non-diegetic, the video then goes into a criticism of the film's wraparound.
I guess at most what we get from this is Christine is dead and the opera is abandoned. The prologue is totally needless from a setup standpoint. The focus on the monkey makes no sense, and yeah, that too is in the show. Why would Christine have been nostalgic about the monkey, and why would Raoul have given a shit? Who knows, who cares?
There's a style of criticism that sort of persists today, where if you just sort of say something in a pithy, dismissive tone of voice, you don't actually have to try and engage with a piece of work to try and see why they might have made the creative decision that they did. A lot of my criticisms of this video here, it's not that you have to like the creative choices that were made, but it would be helpful if you would at least make the effort to figure out why those choices might have been made in the first place.
A framing device works as glue. It holds your story together. Sometimes it gives us perspective because it's from a point of view character, as was the case again with Moulin Rouge. Raoul is so obviously not the point of view character, so him remembering a thing that happened is not only needless, it just doesn't work.
The reason for the wraparound, and the reason that we sort of take Raoul's point of view, is throughout the bulk of the film, Raoul is kind of the odd man out. The film does have all the conflict and suspense of the typical love triangle, but by the end, I don't know about you, but I got the sense that the Phantom might have won out a little bit. You get the sense that there is a connection between Christine and the Phantom that Raoul is never going to understand. Yes, Christine went off with Raoul at the end, but, you know, that kiss and her giving him her ring, there is the sense that, you know, even though she might have gone off with Raoul, there's the sense that maybe the Phantom does still sort of take precedence in her heart.
It also necessitates that the movie doesn't end when the show ends. The stage musical has a pretty perfect ending. The movie keeps going like a long, embarrassing fart. I guess they're trying to show the Phantom's devotion to her, that he showed up at her grave, but who cares? You take a strong ending and you weaken it.
So the wraparound with Raoul, it isn't just to show that Christine is dead. It isn't just to visit her grave. This is Raoul trying to piece together an aspect of his wife's life that he's maybe never going to understand. He's looking for that piece of Christine that she could never give to him, that she could only ever give to the Phantom.
When framing devices work, there's usually a story going on within the framing device, or it's thematic.
Ellis says that usually a wraparound, you know, informs something about the story, informs something about the themes. I think this wraparound does do that. The fact that Raoul isn't the point of view character for the bulk of the film is exactly the point of this wraparound. Okay, now the video talks about the way the Phantom is revealed. Still haven't really resolved the distinction between diegetic or non-diegetic filmmaking or music, but that's fine. We'll just move on to this point now.
In the musical, we don't see him until here. And because of the lighting and his costume, we don't really see him until here. Compare this to the first time we see any of him other than a hand in the movie. Here is that shot. We dive down, all the way down to his scalp. And this is the first real glimpse of the Phantom. Whose idea was this shot?
So at the beginning of the video, she sort of made this suggestion that they just sort of filmed the stage play.
Where Chicago and Cabaret changed a lot adapting to film, Phantom, not so much. It's basically just a filmed version of the stage musical.
But you'll notice that throughout this video, anytime that the film does take advantage of the medium, it's a point of contention. So, you know, why did they do this shot? Well, because it's a film, and film offers you the opportunity to do so. Again, you can disagree with it. You know, if I wanted to nitpick this shot, I would say, you know, it's sort of symptomatic of this thing they were doing a lot of in the early 2000s, where they were trying to sort of use these CGI transitions. If you've seen the movie Old Boy, they do a lot of that stuff. I don't think it's aged particularly well, but it doesn't really detract away from the overall experience, I would say. One criticism that Ellis makes, but which is also pervasive outside of this video, has to do with the Phantom's face. It's not scary enough. It's not grotesque enough. This next part is all scripted, so if it sounds a little more stuffy, a little bit more formal, that's why. There is, I think, a creative rationale for the Phantom being presented this way. As explicitly stated by Christine, it's not about Eric's face, it's about his soul. Let's say the Phantom was more of an explicitly gruesome monstrosity, and let's say Christine's attitude towards him was unchanged. Christine and Eric share the same kiss, she still gives him her ring. Now, this says a lot about Christine's character. It speaks to her compassion for the Phantom, but it doesn't say much about how society might react to his disfigurement. If the contention is, I want a Phantom that makes me go, ew, yuck, wouldn't that then be the reaction of everyone else in the film as well? And wouldn't that give Eric's anger and his mistrust more credence? Yes, society is to blame for the Phantom's alienation, but the question is always, to what extent? Where is anger and resentment reasonable and maybe even just, and when is it up to the individual not to murder people at the opera? Making Eric's deformity quote-unquote not that bad, making it so you can imagine a scenario where he might reintegrate with society, places more of the responsibility for his actions on himself. It speaks more to his ego, his insecurity. It speaks more to his striving for beauty and perfection, and in some sense is more tragic because it's more relatable. You want to say to him, come on man, it's not that bad. How does this square then with Eric's awful treatment as a child, with the horrified reactions of the audience at the freak show? Well, I think you could posit that those reactions to Eric as a child are less to do with the extent of his deformity and more the context with which it's presented. If you put a kid in a cage and call him the devil's child, and not just him, but everybody else is liable to believe it. Okay, scripted part is over, back to a bit more freestyling. Later in Ellis's video, she points out what she sees as a sort of half-hearted allusion to class, and granted, class isn't front and center in the story, but I think there's a bit more there if you know where to look. Because Eric seems to demonstrate potentially a bit of a class resentment. You know, when he was put in a cage and being pointed and laughed at, the people who put him in the cage was, you know, sort of the underclass, sort of these carnival people. And even though the guy lives underground, he does sort of aspire to the finer things. And if you pay attention to the people he kills throughout the film, granted, he does kill the one singer, but he also kills, like, the stagehand. You know, why is he killing the stagehand? That guy's not really bothering anybody. He sort of makes a point to kill that guy, but when it comes to Carlotta, let's say, he seems to have a real bone to pick with Carlotta, but he never does away with her. He almost seems to respect her to an extent. He can find a use for her in his Don Juan play because, you know, her singing's kind of discordant. He does treat the sort of the upper class a bit different than he seems to the lower class. You know, he takes a lighter touch with the theater directors who are always, you know, disobeying his orders. Then again, you've got another sort of class conflict going on between the Fantôme and Raoul. You've got a guy who's come from nothing, who has nothing, versus a guy who has everything, who comes from a wealthy family. And again, while it's not front and center, while it's not explicit, you might divine a certain class resentment from the Phantom. Okay, now Ellis's video returns to the subject of diegesis.
When the Phantom first takes Christine's hand and beckons her to follow, she sees this hallway full of Jean Cocteau arms, and this shot, it drives me insane. This is what I mean by this movie being too conventional for its own good, because this is the only such frame we get, and there's nothing appreciable separating it from the diegesis. I guess this is trying to show just how hypnotizing he is, so we get weird, surreal Jean Cocteau arms, but no more weird, surreal shots for the rest of the movie. And we know the Jean Cocteau arms are imaginary because the movie goes out of its way to show us this 2 scenes later. This wouldn't be such a problem except that more weird shit keeps happening in the movie, but it appears to be literal. That horse, is it diegetic or is it like the Jean Cocteau arms and also imaginary?
Again, I'm not sure why there needs to be any distinction here between diegetic or non-diegetic. I think the point here is to sort of blur the lines between fantasy and reality. There's no telling whether these arms that pop out of the wall are actually supposed to be magical or hallucinogenic. They could be some sort of mechanical device.
This happens in the movie because that's how it happens in the show. Candles literally rising from the floor. But when you see it in the show, do you think, oh hey, literal candles literally rising from the floor? No, you're like, oh, this is like a scene transition. I've heard about those. Nope, in the movie it appears to be literal. The Phantom is not only a genius mechanical engineer, but has a lot of spare time.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly the point. He is a mechanical genius with a lot of time on his hands.
He's a genius. He's an architect and designer. He's a composer and a magician. A genius, monsieur.
That's the entire point. You know, he's got that strange, lifelike statue of Christine. There's no, I think the point is that there's no telling, at least initially, what might be magic and what might be sort of mechanical invention. The reason why you might not get any more of those sort of more overt, fantastical elements later in the film is because Christine does sort of begin to understand, no, this isn't a ghost, this is a man. Speculation is not a bad thing. It is not a bad thing to speculate about something in a story. It's not bad for the audience to be left with a sense of wonder, to wonder what is or was not real. Next, Ellis starts talking about the cinematography, and I don't have as much to say about this because it is so subjective. All I can really say is you're wrong. The film looks terrific. It's one of its most defining features.
The frames tend toward washed out and flat, no variation and very little depth. The classic Schumacher obsession with nipples doesn't even bother me. The lighting is just washed out and amateurish. But the worst are the sets, which at best look fake and at worst look claustrophobic, like the Phantom's way overlit lair. Here the frame needs to be filled utterly and completely because crowded equals good. Here there is no focus. Everything is lit to an absurd level of brightness lest we miss one square inch of this amazing set.
Yes, there's lots of stuff going on, but I wouldn't say it's cluttered or crowded. You know, for starters, the use of color helps break up everything pretty well. It helps separate all the little details so you don't get too lost, too overwhelmed. I would describe the production design as being rich, as detailed. I wouldn't describe it as being crowded. As far as the suggestion that the Phantom isn't presented gloomily enough, that he's too well lit, again, I don't know. I think it's just a matter of taste. I would say the light itself is very sort of detailed. I've seen movies that have very sort of flat, very garish studio style lighting. I would say the lighting is very nuanced and layered. You've got the candlelight, you've got the light coming from behind the organ, you've got the light reflected off the water, wavering on the ceiling. I definitely wouldn't call the lighting flat. After cinematography, the video then goes into a critique of the film's editing.
Editing and cinematography ideally should work in tandem, but in general your editing should match the energy of your scene.
Ellis points to the masquerade scene as an instance where the film should have asserted its style a bit more.
Anyway, the editing is also strange and not good.
What a night! What a crowd! Makes you glad that you're proud, all the creme de la creme.
Watching us and watching them.
It's trying to create an energy, but there isn't any. Again, contrast. In a high-energy musical number like this, you probably want to stay off your master, but we keep cutting back to that.
The reason why you might want to pull back a bit on the editing, why you might sort of sublimate your stylistic inclinations a bit, is to let the frame breathe, let the actors breathe, let the production design breathe, instead of going, you know, look at me, I'm directing. And again, if you don't like the production design, if you think it's too crowded or too busy, then the editing isn't going to work for you either.
And also, you probably want to put your cuts on the beat to make it feel more energetic. And they tend to opt out of this as well.
I think another reason why you might want to not move the camera around too much, why you don't want to be editing to the beat, is motion is also a very powerful tool. Motion in the frame is exciting and evocative. The most overt example of a director letting the motion of the actors in the frame sort of do all the heavy lifting would be Ozu. Ozu's camera was often very static. There was very little editing, and you were just sort of watching someone move through the frame. The woman goes this way, she puts the shoes away, she walks over here, she does that. Ozu and Joel Schumacher are, of course, very different directors, but if I had to guess, that was the intention, or if not the intention, that is what works about the scene, is you are drawn to the motion in the frame. The camera moves less and the editing is less fast-paced to showcase the motion of the dancers.
This happens a lot in this movie. The edits happen at random times that do nothing for the film's flow. And sometimes we need a cut, but we don't get one. For instance, this shot, when the Phantom and Christine touch for the first time. There's nothing fundamentally wrong with it if you watch it with the sound off, but here's what it is with the sound on. Not on a cut, not on a wide shot, but on this quiet, intimate handhold.
The moment where Christine takes the Phantom's hand and the music just starts right up, you don't need anything else other than that. You don't need any fancy editing. It's just about Christine, it's about the Phantom, that's all. You don't need to get in the way of that with any sort of stylistic shenanigans. There's plenty of style to be had right there in that one moment.
And long takes, like Dutch angles, should be employed with care. During Angel of Music, there's a long shot, which is also a long take, of Christine and Meg walking down the hall, and it's like a minute long. Worse, the fact that it's long is the angle is just weird and detached and voyeuristic.
Almost as if there's some sort of Phantom of the Opera watching from the darkness.
And it doesn't fit the tone of the scene at all. Even more overt is the note scene. One long take, and we're walking for the entire time. Really slowly and unnaturally. This, on the other hand, is a terrible use of your long take. It doesn't make sense for them to be in the foyer, and how unnaturally slow they're moving belies how tiny this set is and how unnecessarily long the take is.
In a world where everybody is sort of, that you can auto-tune your way to being a competent singer, you can splice and dice people together, I kind of appreciate taking the time to pull back and sort of just let the actors breathe, let us see them actually doing it, it's more authentic.
I'm not saying that long takes are bad, but they're hard to choreograph and easy to f*** up. High risk, high reward. But my favorite bad long take in this movie is here. Christine and Raoul have just proclaimed their love for each other, and then they leave. And then we get this pondering long take of Gerard Butler being sad. When in doubt, this movie relies on medium close-ups and close-ups of the actors' faces, despite the fact that there are many, often more effective ways to get across your intended emotion.
As far as this close-up of Gerard Butler goes, again, I thought we were wanting to make some distinction between the stage production and the film. Doing a close-up allows you to do that. That's something you're not able to do on the stage. Were you to go through with Ellis's suggestion of doing a sort of more typical sort of, you pull back and you show the Phantom isolated, well, you can do that on stage. That seems more analogous to a stage production, whereas, I'm more interested, again, the cinematic element allows you to get up closer and to really sort of investigate the emotions which are being played out on Butler's face here. This next part of the video where Ellis talks about suspense is maybe the worst piece of criticism in the entire video.
Most modern filmmakers owe something to Alfred Hitchcock as an influence, and if they've read even one book on filmmaking, they're probably familiar with Hitchcock's ideas on suspense.
4 people are sitting around a table. Suddenly, a bomb goes off, blows the people to smithereens. What do the audience have? 10 seconds of shock. Now take the same scene and tell the audience there is a bomb under that table and will go off in 5 minutes. Well, the whole emotion of the audience is totally different because you've given them that information. You can only get the suspense element going by giving the audience information.
So yes, this can be a way to create suspense. Give the audience information that the characters do not have. There is a bomb under the table. Anyway, so when does this movie reveal its cards? When do we find out that the Phantom is there eavesdropping? Constantly. In Schumacher world, in order to maintain suspense, we need to keep panning to the bomb, cutting to the bomb. More shots of the danger element equals more suspense.
This part confuses me a bit because she starts off with Hitchcock presenting a thesis that basically says, if you show the audience a piece of information that the characters don't know about, that is a good avenue towards creating suspense. But then when it's done in Phantom, it's wrong for some reason. The film is cutting to the bomb too many times, I guess, even though in the intro, Hitchcock never specified how often one should cut to the bomb. I don't know. I don't even think this scene is going for suspense, at least not in the way that she's describing it, but we'll get to that in a minute.
And I must assume that suspense is what Schumacher was going for, because why else keep cutting to the Phantom during the big romantic musical number? Like, yes, there is that underlying threat, but there's no suspense because we know exactly where he is at all times. Or perhaps you say he was not going for suspense, but that we are supposed to feel sad for the Phantom. Well, you can't have it both ways. You can't have this big epic swell of a romantic ballad intercut with Butler's quivering lip. Trying to intercut the big romantic ballad with any diametrically opposed emotion, be it suspense or sad for Phantom, it just doesn't work. Imagine if during this scene in Moulin Rouge they kept cutting to the Duke being sad.
Yours are the sweetest eyes I've ever seen.
First of all, the idea that you can't have more than one, or that you can't have conflicting or contrasting emotions in a scene is just, it's ludicrous to me. My immediate thought was of Cyrano. Yeah, if you think of Cyrano de Bergerac, or if you think of the Roxanne adaptation, you've got Cyrano, and he's sort of feeding lines to the other guy up to the woman, but he's also in love with the woman. In that scene, you are feeling more than one thing. You are feeling the romance between the two people, but you're also feeling the heartbreak of Cyrano. So I don't know how that doesn't apply to this scene. Why couldn't you feel the warmth and the romance of Raoul and Christine, but also the sadness and the melancholy of the Phantom? That is the emotional crux of the entire story, I would say. And comparing it to Moulin Rouge, which has a drastically different music. Of course, yes, that is a very, music evokes tone, it evokes emotion. Those are very different tones and emotions that are being played with than the music that is in the Phantom. So this criticism is one of the most ridiculous to me. But also the idea that there is not suspense here. This scene in isolation is not necessarily to invoke suspense, but this scene, what it does is it builds suspense for later. You're seeing the different conflicting emotions bubble to the surface, and the suspense is seeing how those emotions are going to come to a head. How does this resolve? How does the warmth and the romance of Christine and Raoul, how does it resolve with the sympathy that you're feeling for the Phantom? This was the most frustrating criticism to me.
Yeah, it might be more suspenseful to, not know exactly what's going on. But no, just show his every move to the audience. Just show all your cards, movie. Whatever. So we see his every fucking move in this scene, whereas in the show, we don't see him at all. It was a build-up that was both mysterious and suspenseful. In the show during the ballet, we know something might happen, but we don't know what or when. Unlike in the movie where we see him killing a man the whole time, so we know what's going on, so there's no suspense.
Again, there seems to be this contradiction. Hitchcock says to show the bomb beforehand to build suspense, but when Schumacher does show the bomb, it doesn't work for some reason. And again, cutting to the Phantom while he's running around up in the rafters, that is just another avenue afforded to you by film that you can't really get on the stage. I don't understand all these many comparisons to the play when at the outset of the video, the contention was made that he followed the play exactly. So I don't know, which is it?
The movie adds a sword fight, after which Raoul lets Eric go. Hey, Phantom, would this not count as your much sought-after act of compassion?
No, that was Raoul showing pity. There's a difference between pity and compassion. Alright, I think that's about the bulk of the criticisms. I don't know. I don't know if there's any point of going back and critiquing a video that's almost 10 years old from a YouTuber who isn't really active anymore. I don't know. It just seems like, you look back at sort of the genesis of a lot of this stuff. You look at the criticisms of yesteryear, and you look at the criticisms that are popular today, and you sort of trace their influence, and it doesn't seem to have gotten much better. The quality of the criticism around both this film and others doesn't seem to have gotten any better. What it all comes down to is, I rewatched Phantom of the Opera. I thought it was excellent. Really, just really, really good. And it was really surprised to learn how controversial it was, and to, reading some of the criticisms, I did not think that they were very good, and I thought this video made a good sort of, a good way to sort of address a lot of these criticisms. Anyway, let me know what you think. Subscribe if so inclined. I write books. If you like books, Phantom of the Opera. Just the main point is go rewatch 2004's Phantom of the Opera. It's great. It's ripe for being reappraised. You could put it back in theaters right now. I think it would do gangbusters. What, Wicked? You want me to go see Wicked? No. Phantom of the Opera. Terrific. Okay. Goodbye.